Thy God hath commanded thy strength. Strengthen, O God, that which thou hast wrought for us. Psalm 68, verse 28. The verse opens with a declaration before it becomes a petition. God has already commanded Israel's strength. The strength Israel possesses does not originate from a human source. God commanded it into existence and sustains it by his authority. David is not asking God to give Israel something new. He is asking God to confirm and continue what God has already established through his own command. The petition that follows is direct. Strengthen what thou hast wrought for us. God is the one who worked. The victories, the deliverances, the recoveries described throughout the psalm all belong to God's workmanship. Israel's role was to receive and respond. David now asks God to reinforce his own work because the continuation of God's purposes depends on God's ongoing power. This is not a prayer of anxiety. It is a prayer that correctly identifies where strength originates and returns the matter to its proper source. Because of thy temple at Jerusalem shall kings bring presents unto thee. Psalm 68, verse 29. The temple becomes the focal point of international recognition. Kings bring presents to God because of what his temple represents, his dwelling among his people, his visible presence established on earth. The gifts these kings bring are not tribute paid to a conquering nation. They are acknowledgement paid to the God whose power and glory cannot be ignored. This verse looks beyond David's immediate circumstances toward a future where God's fame reaches the courts of foreign kings. Solomon's reign gives a partial fulfillment when the Queen of Sheba arrives with gifts in 1 Kings 10 verses 1 to 2. She declared that God's wisdom and blessing on Solomon exceed what she had heard. The verse looks further still, toward the day when all nations bring their glory into the presence of the King of Kings, as Revelation 21, verses 24 to 26, describes kings of the earth bringing their honor and glory into the New Jerusalem. Rebuke the company of spearmen, the multitude of the bulls, with the calves of the people, till every one submit himself with pieces of silver. Scatter thou the people that delight in war. Psalm 68, verse 30. The verse turns to judgment. The company of spearmen represents organized military power arrayed against God's purposes. Bulls and calves describe proud, aggressive nations using animal imagery to capture their strength and stubbornness. These are not passive enemies. They delight in war, finding satisfaction in conflict and domination of others. David asks God to rebuke them until they submit with pieces of silver, bringing tribute as conquered peoples, acknowledging a superior power. The scattering of those who delight in war is not incidental, but necessary. Nations that build their identity around aggression and conquest cannot coexist with God's established order. God's rebuke does not slow them down. It dismantles their capacity and disperses their forces until submission replaces defiance. The language is uncompromising because the opposition is deliberate. Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. Psalm 68, verse 31. The verse names two nations representing the ancient world's extremes. Egypt stands as Israel's former oppressor, the nation from which God redeemed his people through signs and wonders. Ethiopia represents the distant south, far from Jerusalem's courts. Both nations appear here not as enemies, but as worshippers. Princes from Egypt come forward. Ethiopia stretches out her hands to God in the posture of prayer and surrender. These are not conquered peoples dragged before a throne. They come with hands extended toward the God whose power and mercy they have witnessed. This fulfills God's ancient promise to Abraham in Genesis 12, verse 3, that all families of the earth would be blessed through him, as the nations that once stood against Israel now reach toward Israel's God.